So you're Blues captain Ryan O'Reilly, and you want a haircut that's as custom as your stick curve. At Great Clips, we save your haircut details in clip notes, so you get your signature look every time. We got you, and you got this. Great Clips, official hair salon of the NHL.
Joining us now, our Wednesday regular from TSN Insider and the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. It's Mr. Darren Dreger here with Sekeres and Price. How you doing, Dregs? 1 week until the fireworks begin, huh?
Yeah, it's starting to cook a little bit here, and nobody should be surprised by that. You know, you're through the Stanley Cup final. Teams are in pro scouting meetings, amateur scouting meetings. The Memorial Cup championship final is set for tonight. So there's still, lots of hockey to be consumed, but so many teams are in their meetings and trying to separate fact from fiction in terms of who's available and who isn't. So it's busy.
What's the latest on JT Miller as you know it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think that there's much of an update other than the interest is consistent and no different than what we talked about last week. I believe, this is my speculation, that Vancouver is going to get an offer on JT Miller that they just simply can't refuse. Now, is there something in the works at this point? Not that I'm aware of, but I know that there's no shortage of interest. And, that's where Patrick Allvin and Jimmy Rutherford have to get to that place where, all right, well, we know that here are the list of teams that are of primary interest, but when does that manifest into something that we feel like we need to move on? And that's where, the old Trader Jim sort of labeling comes into play. Is the best deal the one that you wait for that is likely going to come near the draft or maybe on the draft floor? Probably. But as we've also talked about here, Vancouver is in a different situation. They're not in a position where they're interested in collecting draft picks. They want good young players. Vancouver wants to be competitive. They know they need to be competitive, and they expect to be competitive next year. So I suspect that there's a lot of talk going on around JT Miller, but maybe the Vancouver Canucks are best served to wait until action really intensifies in Montreal at the draft.
There's a report out there today that the New York Rangers have interest in Pierre-Luc Dubois. That would suggest big game hunting on Broadway, and we know they were involved on JT Miller back last season. What are you hearing with regards to the Rangers and perhaps rekindling that interest in Miller?
Well, I suspect that New York would be a team that would have interest. And again, Matt, when you look at the teams that came close to advancing the Stanley Cup final, it doesn't get any closer than the Eastern Conference final for the Rangers. Miller's got that bite and combination of productivity. And historically, we know that the Rangers have interest. Yes, there's a report out there. There's rumors speculating that the Rangers also have interest in Pierre-Luc Dubois. Well, that doesn't surprise me even a little bit. I'm sure they have interest in Mark Scheifele. There wouldn't be many teams around the league that wouldn't have interest in those players. But let's just for a moment, sit in the chair of Kevin Cheveldayoff, or if you want to go to the top of the food chain, Mark Chipman. I know that the back and forth with Barry Trotz until Barry finally pulled out of the running last week was that Winnipeg is committed to winning. Now, we know that they've got Blake Wheeler, their captain, on the trade block. And we know that Winnipeg is willing to be creative. But that's more from a cap perspective than anything else. So they still haven't hired a coach, and it's likely that matter gets remedied at some point this week or on the weekend. Well, one of the first questions that any coach with a level of experience is going to ask is, all right, what is your plans with this roster? And I know that Cheveldayoff and company have been very transparent and very honest with the coaches that they've interviewed as to what their direction is. In a perfect world, they would hope that Pierre-Luc Dubois has a change of heart. If he doesn't and they're forced into the bridge, well, then all bets are off. And the teams of interest will be multiple. For me, it would start with the Montreal Canadiens, because obviously Montreal, from a cultural perspective, wants to surround themselves with as many French Canadians as possible. But yeah, I'm sure the New York Rangers have interest, but I don't think that there's been any active trade negotiations between the clubs.
Hey, Dregs, wind it back a week when you were on with us, because you piqued my interest when we were talking about Miller and you name-checked the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, you did it in a sentence that said the Rangers, the Hurricanes, any team that fell short should have interest. And I agree with you that lots of teams that fell short certainly would value what JT Miller has to offer. But do you see the Carolina Hurricanes as a team? I mean, skill for days, but maybe lacking a little bit of the bite that you mentioned there. Is there a fit?
Sorry, I think there's a fit there. I do, but that's again me and just hearing a few waves of speculation prior to last week and a little bit more this week. The problem that you have is, what does that fit look like from Vancouver's standpoint, right? We've heard the name of Natchez. Look, if I were Patrick Galvin or Jim Rutherford, I'd be asking for Seth Jarvis, and I don't know that Don Waddell or the Carolina Hurricanes want any part of that. But that's the young type of dynamic fit that the Vancouver Canucks would be in the market for. I think that JT Miller is a good fit in Carolina because of how he plays the game. But we know that Tom Dundon, the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes, is often attracted to shorter-term contracts as well. So maybe you take JT Miller for a spin. You try and get something done. If you don't, you don't, and you move on. So I think that there are a couple of reasons why the Carolina Hurricanes would consider JT Miller.
Well, every draft year, there are big names that are on the block, and you've just listed a few of them. It seems and feels like a foregone conclusion that Kevin Fiala's days in Minnesota are done for a variety of reasons. How does that thing play itself out?
Yeah. Well, if you want to list the reasons, primarily it's cap related, as we know, right? That's the big issue for Bill Guerin and the Minnesota Wild. But, they've got other things that they want to get done. They would love to have Marc-Andre Fleury back. What's that contract going to look like? It's going to be reasonable from a term standpoint, just based on where Fleury is in his career. They like the idea of having Talbot and Fleury as their 1-2 punch, that tandem in goal. So they're pretty confident in Minnesota that they're going to be able to work something out. No guarantee, but they're confident. They've got depth defensemen, Jacob Middleton, who they continue to target and negotiate with. And no matter what that deal looks like, it'll probably be just north of $2 million annual average salary when they get it sorted through. That's another small bite out of the salary cap. So when you're continuing to add contracts the way that they continue to do, well, something's got to give. And the trade interest in Kevin Fiala is terrific, as it should be. I mean, he was in the doghouse there for a good stretch of time with the head coach, and they found a way to sort that out. And then he became a very good player for the Minnesota Wild. So he's certainly not going to be given away, and it's got to be a fit that makes sense for the Minnesota Wild. But he's definitely a player that many general managers have circled.
Jakob Chychrun's a name that obviously was front and center through most of last year. Then he got hurt, and obviously we know Arizona's got all of its issues as it tries to sort things out and move forward here. But is his name being talked about again?
Yeah, it is, Jeff. And what's hard to separate in terms of fact and fiction, though, is, are these just old rumors that are resurfacing again? Or, is Billy Armstrong, the general manager of the Coyotes, willing to soften what his level of expectation is? Man, he's got a tough job as general manager of that team, because you're talking about a real frugal ownership. I deal a lot with player agents, and, the player agents who are trying to get deals done with the Arizona Coyotes are pulling their hair out because, the deals just from a player perspective don't make sense. And then you've got that big issue of playing in the smallest arena in the history of the National Hockey League for the next few years at least, and that's a deterrent for a lot of players. So I guess I'm circling back in looking at all the issues that Armstrong is facing and wondering, Again, whether the stuff we're hearing now is fresh on Jakob Chychrun or it's just an old rumor that's finding legs because we're entering into a very busy period. I believe that Jakob Chychrun would love to get traded. I do. But then you have to look at his contract. In fact, he's a very important piece. That team does want to maintain some level of competitiveness. So is the contract that he has worth more to the Arizona Coyotes than the trade return might be, unless Armstrong is willing to bend a little bit. And we don't know that at this point.
Dregs, we've heard much about potentially high picks being in play, whether it's Jersey, Philadelphia, Ottawa, or some others. Are you hearing anything with regards to some of those plum first-round picks next week being available?
No, not really. Not really, Matt. But you're right. New Jersey has not shied away from the fact that, they would consider moving the second pick overall. But Tom Fitzgerald has also made it abundantly clear that if he's doing that, he's getting the perfect fit back. And, that's a mid-20s player, somebody with some cost certainty, or at least a player that they can control for a period of time. So, again, whether there's the right fit out there or not, what's the Chicago Blackhawks? What are they up to? I mean, they hired Luke Richardson as their head coach, which I applaud. I think Luke was certainly overripe in terms of readiness to be an NHL head coach. But we keep hearing about Alex DeBrincat. Well, to me, that's the type of player, if I'm Tom Fitzgerald, I'm looking for, if I'm even remotely considering that second pick. But then you look at it from New Jersey's standpoint, what are they doing in goal? Could there be a fit somewhere along those lines? I'm also looking at the Montreal Canadiens, and not because of the first pick overall. I can't even imagine. We in the media who follow the draft closely love to talk about the remote possibility of the first pick overall being in play, and I just don't see it. I don't. But Montreal has 14 draft picks in this year's draft. There's no way that Ken Hughes and Jeff Gorton are drafting 14 players. You're just never going to sign 14 players from the same draft class. So I do know that Montreal would love to add another pick, maybe as high as in the top 5. How are they doing that? What piece are they willing to move? If you go back to New Jersey, is it even remotely conceivable that Montreal could land the first pick and the second pick? And if you're landing that second pick, what does that package look like? Is it Josh Anderson and then a prospect and a couple of other draft picks? I don't even know. But that's the kind of stuff that's kind of being bandied about by other teams around the NHL. You're certainly not going to get Montreal or New Jersey to confirm any of that.
I'm with you. I have no idea how that would all play out, but I am here for it. Signing up. Montreal getting the top 2 picks at home on that first night of the draft would be outstanding.
Well, it would end the debate of, do you take Shane Wright or Slavkovsky, right?
Yeah.
You get your centerman and your winger in one fell swoop.
Yeah, well, and I saw McKenzie's draft rankings last night. Slavkovsky edged Wright in his poll of Scout. Yeah. Do you think there's any chance Slavkovsky does go first overall to Montreal?
I 100% believe there's a chance. I do. Now, look, we talked a little bit about Capo Caco earlier in the segment here. Mm-hmm. I remember watching him at the Men's World Championship live, and I just thought that he was going to be can't miss in the NHL. I thought he was going to step into the National Hockey League and be an impactful player. And what we've learned is that, look, the NHL is a different beast. Physically, was he ready? Sure. Mentally, well, probably not. And there are parts of his game that needed to be fine-tuned for NHL play. Doesn't mean that Capo Caco isn't going to be a terrific NHL player in time. But I'm saying all that because I'm wondering the same of Slavkovsky. He's been playing with men in pro hockey. Big dude, just flat-out big guy. So he's going to fit on a wing in the top 6, and you think he's going to be impactful, but are you sure? And if you're not sure, then how do you pass up on a top-ranked centerman when you're drafting first overall? So I think there's a chance, but it still feels a little bit remote for me.
Wonderful stuff, Dregs. Thanks for this today. We look forward to next Wednesday when we'll be on the eve of the draft and all the happenings in the NHL offseason. Be well, my friend.